So many of these underground hospitals have been gutted or maintained, and this one is completely forgotten.
The Nazis didn't just wage war, they left behind nightmares buried in stone, steel, and bone. From ghostly hospitals beneath city sewers to uranium cubes that nearly birthed a nuclear apocalypse, their darkest secrets still echo. These are the most terrifying finds of Nazi Germany. Relics of power, cruelty, and death that refused to stay buried. The hidden Nazi hospital. Imagine walking into a city sewer and finding yourself in the middle of a forgotten Nazi hospital. That's exactly what a German explorer stumbled upon, a chilling reminder of World War II buried beneath modern streets. The footage he shared online shows a place frozen in terror. Rusted stretchers still sit beneath cracked operating lights, waiting for patients who never returned. Hallways stretch into darkness, lined with peeling paint and dust that hasn't moved in decades. And then, the word. Blood bank. Blood bank. A single word scrawled on a corridor wall that sends shivers through anyone who sees it. This wasn't just an abandoned building. It was a bunker of medicine, surgery, and survival carved into the underground, where the screams of the wounded echoed through concrete tunnels. Imagine the fear of being dragged down here, knowing the war raged above, unsure if you'd ever climb back into daylight again. Now, decades later, the hospital feels less like a relic and more like a tomb. Strange objects litter the floor, untouched since the 1940s. Graffiti from modern intruders only makes the place more unnerving, as if time itself refuses to move on. Some compare it to a horror video game, but this was real life. Steel, blood, and war stitched into the earth. The explorer who revealed it refuses to share the exact location, and for good reason. Some secrets are too terrifying to disturb. Jewish skull collection. Among the Nazis' most disturbing crimes was a plan so grotesque, it sounds like horror fiction. The Jewish skull collection. Conceived by SS anatomist August Hirt and sanctioned by Himmler himself, the project's goal was to build a museum of human remains to prove the so-called inferiority of Jews. In 1943, 86 Jewish men and women were selected at Auschwitz. Chosen for what Nazis called racial characteristics, they were photographed, measured, and transported to the Natzweiler Struthof camp in Alsace. There, in August of that year, Commandant Josef Kramer personally gassed them. Their bodies were shipped to the Anatomy Institute of the Reich University of Strasbourg, where they were to be stripped to skeletons and displayed as evidence of Nazi science. But the war ended before the project was complete. When Allied troops entered Strasbourg in 1944, they found corpses still preserved in formalin, some intact, others beheaded, awaiting defleshing. It was a nightmare discovery, a collection of murdered humans, arranged not for medicine, but for ideology. After the war, trials condemned many of the perpetrators. Hirt killed himself before capture. Kramer was hanged, and others received sentences so light they remain a stain on history. For decades, only one victim was known by name. Then, in 2003, researcher Hans Joachim Lang identified all 86, restoring their stolen identities. Today, memorials in Strasbourg bear their names. But the fact remains. Beneath university walls, the Allies uncovered not relics, not ruins, but the bodies of murdered Jews, prepared for a museum of racial hate. Hitler's cursed wolf's lair. In the heart of Poland's dense Masurian forest lies one of the most chilling remnants of the Third Reich, the Wolf's Lair. It wasn't just a bunker, it was a fortress of fear, where Hitler buried himself under 7 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. terrified of assassins and Allied bombs that never came. From 1941 to 1944, this hidden labyrinth of bunkers, minefields, and camouflaged strongholds became the nerve center of Nazi Germany's war machine. More than 2,000 men and women lived under its shadow, sworn to protect a dictator who trusted no one. The site is infamous for the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg smuggled a bomb into Hitler's daily briefing. When the Soviets advanced, Hitler abandoned his lair. The retreating Germans packed the complex with tons of explosives, trying to erase every secret buried within its walls. Even then, the bunkers refused to die. Massive slabs of concrete still jut from the forest like broken tombstones. To walk there today is not to visit a battlefield, but a cursed sanctuary, the echo of a world that came terrifyingly close to destruction. Souvenirs of blood and ashes. When Nazi Germany fell, its empire of symbols didn't vanish. Some were ripped down, broken apart, and carried away. Fragments of terror preserved by those who wanted the world never to forget. In 2017, the University of Southern California received one of the rarest collections of its kind. Hundreds of artifacts smuggled back from Hitler's Germany by Lieutenant Harry K. Wolff, Jr., an American Jewish soldier in Patton's Third Army. Inside the collection are flags torn from Nazi rallies, blood-red armbands, medals, and propaganda newspapers. There are intimate letters describing battles, tribunals, even the bitter silence of German towns where civilians glared as Allied troops marched past. And among the most chilling relics, shattered fragments of the giant swastika that once loomed over Hitler's rally grounds at Nuremberg, blown apart on Patton's orders. Wolff was meticulous. He photographed where he found each piece, numbered his letters, and described every step. His writing painted contrasts of war. Jewish High Holy Day prayers whispered among soldiers in Germany, followed by the grotesque reality of living in Dachau after liberation, when the SS themselves filled its barracks as prisoners of war. What he called junk has become a vital record of terror. Because behind the medals and banners are the ghosts of those who suffered. Jews stripped of their property, civilians silenced by fear, and prisoners who never saw freedom. Today, these relics sit in the USC archives. Not trophies, not souvenirs, but evidence. Fragments of a nightmare, preserved so history cannot be erased. Buried relics inside a German house. Some discoveries aren't buried in forests or locked in bunkers. They're waiting in the walls of ordinary houses. In 2021, a history teacher cleaning flood damage in Hagen, Germany, tore away plaster and revealed a hidden cavity. Inside was a trove of Nazi relics, a portrait of Hitler, gas masks, a revolver, brass knuckles, party badges, letters, and propaganda. For decades, the house had appeared harmless. But during the war, it had served as the local headquarters of the National Socialist People's Welfare, an organization that seized Jewish property and redistributed it to loyal Germans. As Allied troops closed in during 1945, officials had crammed their tools of violence and ideology into the walls, sealing away evidence in a hurry. More than 70 years later, the room exhaled its secret like a tomb disturbed. The horror wasn't confined to Germany. That same year, workers clearing the basement of Argentina's Supreme Court stumbled on wooden crates stacked like forgotten cargo. Inside were documents shipped from Tokyo in 1941, Nazi propaganda bound for South America, hidden in 83 diplomatic pouches. Customs officials had intercepted them, but instead of being destroyed, they were stored and forgotten. For decades, they lingered under a courthouse where justice was meant to live. while Argentina itself became a haven for fleeing Nazi officials after the war. Both finds are terrifying, not just for their contents, but for what they reveal. The ideology of the Reich was not only fought on battlefields, it was smuggled into homes, schools, and courts, buried in walls and archives, waiting for someone to tear open the plaster and let the ghosts out. Dora Mittelbau. They called it a factory. In truth, it was a tomb carved out of stone. Dora Mittelbau was where the Nazis buried men alive and forced them to build nightmares. Inside the mountain, there was no day and no night, only blackness, broken by flickers of torchlight against dripping rock. Prisoners were herded into the caverns, stacked like corpses in passageways that reeked of rot and waste. They slept on the ground beside the dead, knowing they could be next before morning. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. Every breath was poison. Here, men were not treated as human beings. They were tools, bent backs, bloody hands, hollow eyes. If a part was dropped, if a bolt was late, if a man faltered, the punishment was swift. A rifle shot, a beating that shattered bones, or a rope hung from a beam as others were forced to watch. And what was all this suffering for? To create machines meant to bring death from the sky. Pilotless bombs, flying fire, and the most feared of them all, the V2 rocket, the world's first missile. It fell faster than sound, slamming into cities without warning, tearing streets apart in silence and flame. To Hitler, it was a wonder weapon. To the prisoners, it was a coffin assembled piece by piece, with their own blood as mortar. 1 in 3 who entered Dora never left alive. They were starved, worked until their bodies snapped, or executed for the smallest suspicion of sabotage. Corpses piled higher than the machines they built. The ground itself drank their sweat and blood. When the Allies arrived in April 1945, they didn't liberate a camp. They unearthed a vision of hell. Half-dead survivors crawled among thousands of bodies left to rot. The machines gleamed in silence, immaculate, while the men who had built them wasted away in filth. Historians call the V2 rocket a milestone of technology. But Dora Mittelbau tells the real story. These rockets were forged in death. They were not weapons of progress. They were weapons of despair. Creations born in a mountain where the price of every launch was human life. The basement Panzer awakens. Imagine walking into an ordinary German home and realizing the walls are hiding a war machine. That's exactly what police discovered in 2015, when they tore into the basement of a house in Heikendorf. There, caged in concrete, waited a Panzer V Panther, Hitler's steel predator, preserved in silence for 70 years. This wasn't just a rusting shell. The Panther had been kept in working condition, its massive frame wedged underground like a monster asleep in a crypt. Alongside it lay an 88mm gun, a torpedo, and even a V1 rocket, weapons designed to rip cities apart. Neighbors remembered the owner driving the tank through snowbound streets decades earlier, as if the battlefield had never ended. Dragging the beast out was a battle in itself. The army had to bring in recovery vehicles just to wrench the Panther free from its underground lair. When it emerged, its armor still gleamed with menace. The sloped plates, the commander's cupola, the hulking gun barrel, an unmistakable reminder of the terror it once unleashed. The real horror isn't that the tank still existed. It's that it had been hidden under a family home, beneath a town that went about its business for decades, never realizing a predator of war slept just below their feet. When the Panther was hauled back into daylight, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was proof that the machinery of the Reich still lingers in silence, waiting for someone to open the wrong door. Fortress of Shadows. Carved into the jagged slopes of Poland's Owl Mountains is one of Nazi Germany's most terrifying enigmas. Project Reese, or the Giant. Built between 1943 and 1945, this sprawling underground labyrinth was forced into existence by concentration camp prisoners who worked until they collapsed in darkness. Thousands died, and their remains were swallowed by the very stone they cut. No one knows with certainty what the Reese complex was meant to be. Some claim it was intended as Hitler's final headquarters, a fortress so buried that no bomb could reach it. Others whisper it was designed for weapons of annihilation, nuclear research, or jet bombers assembled in secret caverns. What is certain is chilling. Hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of rock were excavated, colossal chambers wide enough to hold factories were created, and yet the war ended before the project reached its purpose. The tunnels at Walim, Brzeczka, and Osowka stretch endlessly, with unfinished corridors fading into dead ends and sealed doors. Legends tell of waterfalls powering hidden generators, of stolen art hidden in vaults never opened again. Under Książ Castle, 2 subterranean levels drop nearly 180 feet below the surface, where rumors persist of a vanished train loaded with treasure. The complex lingers in ruins, half fortress, half tomb. Damp corridors still carry the weight of suffering, and every unexplored shaft suggests the same unsettling question: what secrets of terror remain locked in the dark? Shrine of Secrets in Argentina. In 2017, Argentine police raided a quiet suburban house outside Buenos Aires. What they found looked like something out of a horror film. Behind a heavy bookshelf, officers discovered a hidden door. Beyond it was a secret room, dusty, sealed, and packed with over 75 Nazi artifacts. Inside glass cases were handguns etched with swastikas, daggers, war medals, and even a massive bust of Hitler staring out from the shadows. Children's toys, harmonicas, and building blocks marked with Nazi symbols lay beside a phrenology device, a tool once used to measure skulls in the name of racial science. These weren't harmless antiques. They were the instruments and propaganda of a regime built on cruelty, smuggled across an ocean to hide in plain sight. Authorities believe these objects belonged to high-ranking Nazis who fled Europe as the Reich collapsed. Argentina, under Juan Perón, had offered sanctuary to fugitives like Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele, and the artifacts are thought to have arrived with men who escaped justice. Some items were still in their original cases, untouched since the 1940s, as if their owners expected to use them again. The discovery left investigators shaken. Among the pieces was a magnifying glass, linked by photographs to Hitler himself. Toys designed to indoctrinate children sat alongside weapons meant to kill. It was less a collection than a shrine, a private museum of the Third Reich, sealed behind a wall for decades. And its existence proved something terrifying. The ideology of the Reich didn't die in Berlin. It hid, waiting, half a world away. Dugout aircraft. For decades, a forest outside St. Petersburg hid a secret in its soil, one of Nazi Germany's most feared machines, the Focke-Wulf 190 Würger. When searchers uncovered it in 1989, they found the fighter almost intact, its twisted frame preserved by the earth like a corpse in a shallow grave. This wasn't just a wreck. It was a story of sabotage, captivity, and death. On July 19, 1943, Feldwebel Paul Retz took off to attack a Soviet train. Minutes later, his brand-new engine seized, sending him crashing into enemy territory. He survived the wreck, but was swallowed by Soviet captivity. vanishing for 6 years. To his comrades, he was simply missing. The terror came when the aircraft was examined decades later. Inside the engine, investigators discovered a rag stuffed into the oil lines. Deliberate sabotage. The Luftwaffe had relied on slave labor to build its weapons, and here was evidence of revenge carried out in silence. The plane had been doomed before it ever touched the skies, turned into a flying death trap by the hands of those Germany had enslaved. When the wreck was pulled from the forest by helicopter in 1991, it looked like it had been waiting to be found, preserved as a warning. Restored, it now flies again. The only original FW190A with its authentic engine. But its gleaming frame hides the truth. This war machine is not just an artifact of engineering. It is a ghost of sabotage and a reminder that even in the darkest days, death was built into the Reich's own creations. The vanished Amber Room curse. Few wartime thefts are as chilling as the disappearance of the Amber Room, a chamber once called the eighth wonder of the world. Imagine a hall glowing with 6 tons of carved amber, gold leaf, and mirrors, an opulent jewel box built for the Russian czars. In 1941, Nazi forces stripped it from the Catherine Palace and shipped it to Königsberg Castle. Within days, the priceless masterpiece vanished into darkness. The details are as unsettling as the beauty once was. Curators tried to disguise the chamber behind wallpaper to keep the invaders from finding it, but the deception failed. German soldiers dismantled the room in just 36 hours, crating away every panel. For a brief moment, it was displayed in Königsberg, but as the war turned, it disappeared. Some claim it burned in Allied bombings. Others whisper it was loaded onto a doomed ship, swallowed by the Baltic. Even stranger, rumors spread that the Nazis buried it within underground vaults, sealing it away with traps. What makes the Amber Room terrifying is not only the theft, but the legends left behind. Treasure hunters chasing it have met mysterious deaths, leading some to believe the chamber carries a curse. From vanished expeditions to suspicious accidents, the search has become as dangerous as the war itself. A reconstruction stands today in Russia, glowing like the original. But the true Amber Room, the panels touched by emperors, stolen by Nazis, and lost in fire and blood, remains a phantom. And wherever it rests, it guards its secrets like a tomb. Fortresses of concrete and fear. Rising above the shattered skylines of Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna stood colossal blocks of reinforced concrete, flak towers. These were not ordinary defenses. They were medieval castles reimagined for modern war. With walls up to 11 feet thick and bristling with anti-aircraft guns, they turned entire neighborhoods into killing grounds for Allied bombers. But the horror of the towers wasn't just in the firepower. Each one was built as a fortress city, with enough space to shelter tens of thousands of civilians. In Berlin, families huddled in the dim corridors as Luftwaffe crews fired thousands of rounds per minute from the roofs above. When the air raid sirens wailed, these towers became vertical crypts where civilians lived in constant fear, sealed inside the Reich's last safe havens while destruction thundered outside. As the war closed in, the towers grew more desperate. In Vienna, hospitals were crammed inside. In Hamburg, priceless works of art were hidden within the walls, guarded by guns meant to shoot down anything that flew overhead. During the final battles for Berlin, the flak towers became the last stands of the regime. Whole communities trapped behind concrete thicker than tank armor. Soviet artillery, even their massive 203mm howitzers, could barely scratch the walls. Surrender came not because the towers fell, but because their defenders ran out of food. Even now, some towers still stand, scarred, immovable, and almost impossible to demolish. Cold, windowless, and unyielding, they remain haunting monuments to a city that turned its homes into fortresses of fear. The Nazi Gold Train Phantom. They call it the Nazi Gold Train, but in Wałbrzych, it's spoken of like a ghost. In the dying months of 1945, as the Red Army thundered west, an armored train rumbled out of Wrocław, its wagons said to be crammed with stolen treasure, bars of gold, jewels ripped from Jewish families, priceless art, weapons, even secret documents meant to outlive the Reich. It was guarded by the SS, men who knew they were escorting blood-soaked riches into the earth. And then it vanished. No wreckage, just silence. Locals whispered it had been swallowed by the mountains, driven into a tunnel beneath Książ Castle, and sealed forever. Others claimed it was mined and booby-trapped, a rolling tomb designed to kill anyone who dared disturb it. For decades, hunters have descended on the hills with maps, metal detectors, and even radar scans that seem to reveal shapes beneath the soil. Each time, the ground gives nothing but disappointment, injuries, and madness. Some call it proof that the Nazis buried the train too well. Others whisper the treasure is cursed. What makes the story terrifying isn't just the treasure, it's the darkness clinging to it. The gold was stolen from the condemned. The art was torn from burning homes. The train was prepared by one of the men who built the extermination camps. Whether it lies beneath Wałbrzych or not, the Nazi gold train has become more than a legend. It is a phantom of greed and death, a lure that still drags the living toward the Reich's shadow, hidden stash of Nazi uranium cubes. It looked small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, but this chunk of uranium was once part of Nazi Germany's nightmare experiment to build a nuclear reactor, a stepping stone toward weapons that could have changed the fate of the war. In 2013, a physics professor in Maryland was handed the cube, wrapped like contraband, with a note that read, "Taken from the reactor that Hitler tried to build." It was one of more than 600 uranium blocks seized by Allied forces at the end of World War II. Each cube was roughly 2 inches across, primitive, pitted from crude casting, and lethal in its potential. During the war, Werner Heisenberg and his team of German scientists suspended these cubes in heavy water by wires, hoping to trigger the chain reactions necessary for a functioning reactor. Documents now reveal there may have been nearly 1,000 cubes split between rival Nazi research groups. Today, a handful of these cubes survive in labs and museums. Each one glows faintly under ultraviolet light, a quiet warning. To most, it looks like a strange old relic. In truth, it is a radioactive reminder that the Nazis once reached for the power to destroy the world. Thrones of stone and tombs of steel. The Nazis didn't just build weapons. They carved nightmares into the very landscape. Fortresses where beauty was twisted into terror, and where the earth itself became a monument to fear. High in the Bavarian Alps, the Nazis carved a palace into the sky itself. They called it the Kehlstein House. The world remembers it as the Eagle's Nest. To reach it, guests passed through a marble tunnel that felt more like a crypt, then stepped into a brass elevator that rose straight through solid rock, like a coffin lifted into the clouds. At the summit, glass walls and stone terraces opened to endless alpine peaks, a throne for a dictator to look down upon the world. Inside, menace wore the mask of luxury, heated floors, secret generators, Mussolini's blood-red marble fireplace. It was a stage set of intimidation, a fortress in the heavens meant to broadcast Nazi supremacy. And yet, Hitler rarely visited. haunted by his fear of storms and lightning on the exposed mountaintop. When Allied troops arrived, they found only scattered gowns, broken art, and empty rooms, a palace of ghosts. But the same hand that carved a fortress into the Alps also scarred the sea. The Channel Islands, once postcard-perfect British soil, were swallowed by Hitler's war machine. The swastika rose over villages, radios were seized, families deported. Then came the construction. Cliffs hollowed into bunkers, beaches buried under concrete, whole landscapes turned into an impregnable fortress. Thousands of slave laborers from across Europe dug until they collapsed, their bodies discarded in shallow graves. The fortifications became prisons of stone, monstrous, suffocating, and yet militarily useless. The Allies simply bypassed them, leaving civilians and occupiers alike to starve behind walls built for a war that had already moved on. Today, both ruins remain. The eagle's nest still perches above Berchtesgaden, its stone terraces gazing into the clouds. The Channel Islands still bear their scars of tunnels and gun emplacements, silent and cold. Whether carved into mountains or buried beneath beaches, these fortresses were never just military projects. If this journey shook you, share it so others see the shadows that still linger. Subscribe for more untold horrors and leave your thoughts below.